What's it like to read Goosebumps as an adult? I remember liking these books a lot when I was a kid. I would reread them over and over and over again because I liked them so much. But how much of that passion for Goosebumps came about because I just didn't know any better? Because I was 10 years old? And how much of it actually holds up over time? In this video, we'll take a look at not only the original Goosebumps books, but also their corresponding TV adaptations, and see how they stack up today. So get ready, because as Goosebumps author R.L. Stine likes to say,
viewers beware, you're in for a scare.
Goosebumps. If you grew up in the 90s, you were probably aware of this best-selling children's horror book series. Goosebumps was a phenomenon, spanning all kinds of merchandise, including, just kidding, it's not that type of video. You're welcome, by the way.
So let's just jump into it.
With the upcoming Goosebumps series releasing in the next few weeks on Disney Plus and Hulu, it got me feeling all kinds of nostalgic. So I figure it's a great time to take a look back at the original books and their original TV adaptations.
Did you just walk by?
No, I was brushing my teeth.
I'm sure they've aged like fine wine.
I love this stuff. I love old stuff. Only come here if you like that stuff.
So in this video, we're going to start off by checking out the original 4 stories, the classics. Okay, so I was originally going to do the first 4 stories. I even posted a teaser on Twitter showing it off, but as it turns out, I apparently had a lot more to say about Goosebumps than I thought I did, so we're only doing the first 2 stories in this video. Yeah, I know it's disappointing. I'm disappointed too, okay? But you know what? Life is disappointing. So you'd better get used to it and stop taking it out on me, a random guy on the internet you don't even know. Anyway, if you want to see any of my future videos on Goosebumps, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Alright, you may wonder how we're going to go about this. Well, I'll go through each book's story first, and as I talk about each book, I'll show clips of the corresponding TV episode, because otherwise the entire video would just be like me holding a book. I think it goes without saying we're not getting on the YouTube trending tab like that. Some of the books don't have a corresponding TV episode. Not pointing any fingers, but maybe certain ones that aren't in this video, but that's a problem for future John.
Damn it!
After giving my thoughts on each story, both the book and the TV episode, I'll give each of them a fun little rating. On a scale of 1 to 5, I will be rating, how scary was it? This will be represented by the category spine shivers. How funny was it? Represented by the category funny bones. And finally, how good was the twist, if there was one? And this will be represented by the category closet skeletons. For example, if it wasn't scary, but it was really funny and had a mediocre twist, well then that would be 1 spine shiver, 5 funny bones, and 2 closet skeletons. And yes, I'm aware all 3 categories are bone related, okay?
Winter's bone.
The first book in the original Goosebumps series, published all the way back in July 1992. Goosebumps number 1, Welcome to Dead House. Just a little background on Welcome to Dead House. It's a bit different than the other books in the series. Author R.L. Stine hadn't quite nailed down the playful tone that the series was known for later on, so Welcome to Dead House is a very serious book, in contrast to later books in the series. We'll get to those later. Or maybe we won't. I won't throw a fit if we don't do a deep dive into Chicken personally. Anyway, back to Welcome to Dead House. Before we get into the story, let's take a moment to admire the cover art. One of the reasons Goosebumps was such a successful book series, even the best-selling children's book series of all time until a certain Harry Potter came along, is due to the cover art by artist Tim Jacobus. As Goosebumps cover art goes, Welcome to Dead House isn't that special. It's iconic because it was the first book in the series, and the so-called Dead House looks pretty intimidating, but it's pretty mediocre in the grand scheme of Goosebumps covers. Tell you what, I'm even gonna rate it. I'm giving the cover 2 creepy covers out of 5. If you've got a better suggestion for these category names, by the way, I am all ears. And no, I don't want to talk about the classic Goosebumps updated cover. For me, it's Tim Jacobus or bust. Fun little bit of trivia for this cover, it's very similar to another book cover Jacobus illustrated for a book called Deadly Impulse. Except I kind of prefer this one. I like the shadow a lot more than whatever this thing in the window is. Alright, that's enough about the outside of the book. Let's get into the inside of the book. The story centers around the Benson family, specifically siblings Amanda and Josh. The story is told from Amanda's perspective. The Bensons move into a new house in a town called Dark Falls.
Dark Falls. A dumb name for a town.
Good one, Josh. An interesting difference between the book and the TV adaptation is that in the book, the house is left to them by the dad's great uncle Charles, who they've never heard of before. But in the show, it's a house that they just bought for cheap from the realtor, Mr. Dawes.
I'm Cufflin Dawes of Dark Falls Realty.
Also, in the show, the house, frankly, sucks. But in the book, Amanda comments the house is actually, quote, really neat. I guess it makes sense that in the more visual medium, they decided to make the house look scary, but I think it actually works better in the book when it's described as a totally normal house. It makes all the creepy stuff that happens later on contrast better. Are you writing this down, R.L. Stine? I know you're watching this.
Viewers beware. You're in for a scare.
Amanda is exploring her new house when she suddenly sees, what's that in the doorway? A Redditor? You mean to tell me a Redditor came back as a ghost to haunt this house? Must have had low karma. Okay, you don't get the joke. Allow me to explain. So on the website Reddit, karma is the rating system that they developed. All right, where was I? Right, so at this point, Josh and the Benson dog Petey disappear, and the entirety of chapter 2 is the family looking for them. Don't worry though, they find them. The Bensons go back to their hometown, and Amanda spends some time with her friend Kathy, a character who's not in the TV episode at all. When they finally move in, Amanda spies a boy standing in the window. Now, this is something that happens in the first 5 minutes of the TV show, but in the book, it happens all the way on page 28, which is like a fourth way through the story. So as you may have guessed, the book starts off pretty slowly. There are entire chapters just dedicated to building tension. For example, after Amanda sees the boy in the window, the entirety of chapter 4 is just Amanda looking around the house for him. But in the show, it's just like 45 seconds of her walking around. One of the hallmarks of a classic Goosebumps story is the sibling dynamic. The entirety of chapter 5 of the book is just Josh and Amanda pranking each other. R.L. Stine likes to do this thing where he leaves you on a cliffhanger at the end of one chapter, and then at the beginning of the next chapter, he reveals that the sinister thing you thought was happening before was actually something totally harmless, like Amanda's little brother Josh playing a prank. Another trademark characteristic in the Goosebumps sibling dynamic are all the wisecracks.
I think it fits in perfectly with the style of house.
Old and rotting.
For example, the dad talks about a window pane here, and Josh just randomly quips, Amanda is a pain. This is classic Goosebumps sibling banter. I don't know if I'm just remembering them differently, but from what I remember, the later Goosebumps books have really annoying siblings in them, so I was pleasantly surprised in Welcome to Dead House when Josh and Amanda are actually kind of tolerable, even a little funny at times.
Great, we're moving to a place that's totally dead.
It's at this point that the book really starts to ramp up. Amanda sees a smiling girl on top of the stairs, and she hears whispering and giggling in random rooms of the house, and even in her closet. It's a surprisingly creepy atmosphere in the book version of the house, and unfortunately, it's an atmosphere that the TV episode fumbles pretty hard. I try to give the TV episode some slack because they were trying to fit a 120-page book into a 44-minute runtime TV show, but still, there's some things that really didn't land. Instead of a smiling girl on top of the stairs, the show has this goofy sequence.
Get up while you can. Get away.
I mean, come on. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, it's a kid's show, but the thing is, there are some episodes of Goosebumps that slap, okay? And they're very capable of making genuinely creepy moments. This just wasn't one of them. Also, there's never any whispering or giggling in the show, although there is a moment where Amanda wakes up to some random yelling. It's a lot less subtle than the whispering and the giggling described in the book, and it doesn't work as well. So back to the book. About halfway through the story, they meet a neighborhood boy named Ray Thurston. Ray seems nice enough at first, though Amanda quickly recognizes him as the boy she saw in her room. That's right, he's the mysterious Redditor. They also meet Ray in the TV show, and the interaction with him is almost verbatim how it's portrayed in the book.
Do I know you?
I'm Ray.
You were in our house.
I was in your house?
I saw you.
I haven't been in that house in a long time.
In a long time?
I used to live in that house
You did?
when I first moved to Dark Falls.
Amanda and Josh quickly find out that Ray's not the only one who used to live in their house. Their new friend Karen Somerset also tells them she used to live there. There's a sequence where the neighborhood kids start closing around Amanda and Josh. In the show, Ray's the one who interrupts whatever was about to happen, but in the book, it's the realtor, Mr. Dawes. I really like how the scene was written in the book because Amanda and Josh are having a seemingly normal interaction with the neighborhood kids until she realizes that they have surrounded them. The way it's written, it leaves open the possibility that Amanda could be imagining it. On the show, though, they make it really overt.
Hey guys, what's going on?
I get it, though. It's hard to depict that kind of feeling visually. It's worth noting at this point that their dog Petey has been barking at literally everyone in Dark Falls. He barks at Mr. Dawes. He barks at random neighbors. He barks at the neighborhood kids. Petey hates these guys, and so do I. Anytime I see a dog bark at someone like they don't trust them, I immediately take the dog's side. I don't know what you did, but it must have been bad. It's around chapter 11 that the action starts to pick up. Petey goes missing, and it's up to the kids to find him. Josh thinks Petey's in the cemetery, which is where they found the dog when he went missing back in chapter 2. On their way there, they discover that they're being stalked by a Redditor. Yep, it's Ray. And Ray gets really aggressive about them not going to the cemetery. He thinks it's a really bad idea. They find out that the town has meetings in the cemetery. This is one of the major deviations between the book and the show. In the show, they're actually having a full town meeting right then. But in the book, they just find an empty amphitheater. Now, this part of the book is actually a really cool reveal. They find Petey in the cemetery, but he doesn't recognize them, and he keeps running away. While they're chasing him, Amanda stumbles upon a gravestone. The name on that gravestone? Karen Somerset, her friend that said she used to live in Amanda's house. They also find the names of all the neighborhood kids on gravestones in the area, including the Redditor himself, Ray Thurston. And the jig is up. As it turns out, all the neighborhood kids are ghouls, and they've been dead for a long time. This is a really cool reveal. Unfortunately, it's followed by a not so cool reveal. Ray reveals that Petey has been barking at them because they're dead, and dogs, quote, always know, which is why they, quote, have to go. Yup, that's right, Petey's dead. Ray even says they killed the dogs first. Come on, man. I know you hadn't quite nailed down the tone of this children's book series quite yet, but I would think it's a really obvious rule that you don't kill the family dog. Are you writing this down, R.L. Stine? Can we get a rewrite? Ray further reveals that the ghouls of the town need fresh blood. It's at this point that Josh starts melting Ray with his halogen flashlight, because as it turns out, the ghouls are weak to light. The description in the book is pretty visceral, actually. It talks about Ray's eyeballs rolling out of his sockets and everything. Ugh. Even though they melted Ray, the kids aren't safe yet. They run home to warn their mom and dad, who are away at a party, but for some reason, Karen's in their house, along with all the other neighborhood kids. Some kid named Jerry Franklin cracks a really weird joke here. The kids start repeating that they used to live in Amanda and Josh's house, and then Jerry cracks, and now guess what? Now we're dead in your house. Huh? Okay, listen, Jerry. Not everyone is cut out for a career in comedy. You gave it your best shot. Not everyone can be as funny as me, right, everybody? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm way better than that Jerry guy, right? I'm way better than this dead kid in the book, right? Amanda laments that Karen seemed so nice, and one of the other kids says, We were all nice, but now we're dead. What, you can't be both nice and dead? Well, I guess that makes sense. I mean, we've proven that you can't be funny and dead, right, Jerry? Karen reveals that there was no great Uncle Charles who left in the house. It was just a trick to get new, fresh blood for the town. Thankfully, the realtor, Mr. Dawes, shows up just in time and whisks the kids away in his car. He takes them back to the cemetery to meet up with Amanda and Josh's parents, but on their way there, Josh trips over a gravestone. A gravestone that reads, Compton Dawes. So yeah, they used the same twist twice. Not my favorite, but it was good the first time, so, you know, it's fine. Mr. Dawes reveals that the town had a plastics factory accident that killed everyone in Dark Falls. And then he says one of the creepiest lines in the book. He tells Amanda that it doesn't hurt to die. You know, it's kind of incredible that this was the best-selling children's book series for a while. There's some pretty, genuinely creepy moments and lines in here. I kind of can't believe that I was reading this in the 3rd or 4th grade or whatever. Anyway, the kids escape from Mr. Dawes and find their parents held hostage in the amphitheater by pretty much the whole town. They're about to kill them or something. It's daytime now, and they notice that there's a dead tree blocking the light from the amphitheater, so they decide to push the tree out of the way. Sunlight fills the amphitheater, and we get more graphic descriptions of the Dark Falls townsfolk melting in the sunlight. Look, Karen Somerset's eyes rolled out of her sockets too. The family's reunited, and they decide to move back to their hometown ASAP. Good idea. As Amanda's leaving Dead House, she sees a new family move in. She simply tells them, I used to live in your house, before getting in the car with her family and speeding away. Wow, that is ice cold, Amanda. Not even gonna warn them? She mentions that she thinks she sees Mr. Dawes standing on the porch with his clipboard, but it's never confirmed. You could make the argument that she thinks that all the townsfolk are vanquished because she saw all of them in the amphitheater before it was flooded with sunlight. But if Mr. It Doesn't Hurt to Die is still hanging around, it kind of seems like the new family's in danger. I don't know. As endings go, it's not that bad. It kind of leaves open the possibility that Dark Falls is just going to continue operating like this for the rest of eternity. Now, you may have noticed it's been a while since we've seen a clip from the TV show in this video, and that's because the way that Welcome to Dead House ends in the TV show is nothing like how it ends in the book. For one thing, the show introduces this ugly family heirloom. The Dark Falls townspeople hate it. It's not really explained why they hate it, but more on the wreath later. The show also introduces a neighbor family, the Thurstons.
Knock, knock. Oh, it's your friendly next door neighbor popping in with breakfast.
Mysteriously, the Thurstons don't have a son named Ray. Instead, they have a daughter.
Wait till you meet my daughter, Karen. She's 13. She's gonna be just thrilled that our new neighbors have kids.
I'm not sure exactly why they decided to change Karen Somerset to Karen Thurston in the show, but they basically ended up fusing the characters of Karen Somerset and Ray Thurston together into one character, which is fine because the show's version of Ray basically just stands around in the background.
Just hanging around.
Karen shows up around the time the kids are circling in on Josh and Amanda.
My mom told me we had new neighbors.
And she even hangs out with Amanda a few times.
What's that thing over your fireplace? If I were you, I'd get rid of it before something really bad happens.
Get rid of our family heirloom? Wreath never do that. I want you to know something. I'm not sorry. When Petey goes missing and the kids go searching for him, they stumble upon the cemetery.
Josh, look where we are.
Like I showed you earlier, the whole town's meeting in the cemetery, where they're just openly plotting when they'll eat the Benson family.
By sunset, we'll all eat.
Ray the Redditor shows up and has the gall to ask this question.
Do you remember me?
No, Ray. They have seen you one single time. It's funny because in the books, they hang out with Ray and the neighborhood kids for like weeks and weeks, playing baseball, hanging out at the school playground. It's like a dollar store version of the Sandlot over there. But in the show, we just get one scene with Ray where he says some weird things.
I haven't been in that house in a long time.
Before he tips his fedora at them and leaves. And that's it. So no, Ray, we don't remember you. And I hope that hurts your feelings. Back at the Benson house, the Thurstons are over for dinner, and it's going about as well as you might expect.
The sun is supposed to come out this afternoon.
Amanda and Josh get chased out of the cemetery by the townspeople, who just couldn't wait another minute to start feasting on them. When they come back home, the Bensons are all in a panic.
Grab a table, whatever you can! Lock the door!
The Thurstons pretend that they're in the same boat, and that they also have to avoid the Dark Falls ghouls.
We thought that they were gone for good.
But then something interesting happens. They come up with the idea to destroy that family wreath they hate so much.
It's that wreath. Mom, we have to destroy it. It's just a wreath. And those are just walking dead people outside.
I've always hated that thing.
So Mother Benson throws the wreath in the fireplace, and as it turns out, that was a bad move.
You thought that wreath would keep you safe. Well, you were right.
The wreath is an interesting twist to the TV show that kind of fills in some gaps from the book, actually. Like, in the book, the Bensons live in Dark Falls for days and days. Like I said, they hang out and play baseball at the school playground for weeks and weeks. And they're in seemingly no danger. But in the show, it's revealed that if it wasn't for the wreath, the Dark Falls dead would have just eaten them right away. It makes you wonder what the Dark Falls dead were waiting for in the book. There's a couple times that Ray Thurston mentions that he's, quote, the Watcher, and his job is to watch the family that moves into Dead House to make sure they don't figure things out too quickly.
I'm the Watcher. I lived in your house. Your room was my room.
But it doesn't explain why the ghouls don't just descend on the house right away. It's not a big deal, but it's one part where I thought the show provided an elegant solution. So anyway, the Bensons are getting swarmed by dead people in their house, yada yada yada.
Mr. Dawes is a real good salesman.
And they get chased all the way to their attic before Amanda and Josh get a bright idea. Seizing the opportunity, the Bensons make a break for the car.
Now I know where everyone around here wore hats.
Interestingly, Mr. Dawes shows up here to plead with them to stay.
Is there something you don't like about the house?
But it's too late. The Bensons are out of there.
Come back! Come back! Dark Falls needs you! I'm hungry!
You know, I really prefer the book to the show in almost every respect, but I do like Mr. Dawes' sudden change of expression at the end there as he reveals his true nature. It's not bad for a kid's show. You may be wondering how the show handles the situation with Petey. Well, on their way out of town, they spot Petey in the road and invite him into the car, only to quickly discover something's wrong with Petey. Oh, that black and white filter. Wow. They really don't make them like this anymore, huh?
Petey, for a dog, you're a great actor. You really scared me when you played dead.
So, that's Welcome to Dead House. You know what time it is now? It's time to rate it. All right, let's see. The first category is spine shivers, or how scary it was. I think I give the book 4 spine shivers out of 5. Some of the lines, like Mr. Dawes, "It doesn't hurt to die, Amanda," were pretty memorable, and the story overall was a little more graphic in its descriptions than I remember other stories being. I had to read about 2 different kid ghouls having their eyes, quote, roll out of their sockets. No thanks. For the show, I think I'd give it 3 spine shivers. It lost a lot of the subtlety from the book, and there was that goofy sequence with the girl saying, "Get away!" in Amanda's room. Still, the chase sequence where the whole town was after Josh and Amanda in the cemetery was really well done. Could have been worse. Next category is funny bones, or how comedic it was. I gotta give the book 0 funny bones. It's just not funny at all. Not even Jerry's side-splitting joke about being, quote, dead in your house or whatever. It's like, sorry, Jerry, but there's a reason your last name is Franklin and not Seinfeld. Right, guys? The show wasn't that funny either, so I think this is a zero funny bone scenario for the show, too. Finally, the last category is closet skeletons, or how good the twist was. For the book, I'll give it 2 closet skeletons. The twist is that everyone in the town is dead, but I mean, it's not much of a twist considering all the hints dropped throughout the story. Like Dark Falls. Seriously? I'll give it a bonus closet skeleton for the gravestone reveal though. That was a cool way to do it. But then I'm gonna take away 1 closet skeleton for using it twice. I'm pretty neutral on the ending where Amanda just says she used to live in their house. Like, that's fine. It's not awesome or anything. It's just okay. For the show, I'm actually gonna give it just 1 closet skeleton. Everything's too overt in the TV adaptation. The house is old and creepy. The residents are really over the top. They're really obvious about how much they hate the wreath. Just nothing is that much of a surprise. Also, there's inexplicably no gravestone reveal, even though they go to the cemetery. Some wasted opportunity there. And now for the overall grade. I'm gonna give the book a solid B. And the show, I'll give it a C. You know, I might adjust these grades later if we get like 20 stories into this and I realize that Welcome to Dead House is actually really good in comparison to all the rest. But right now, these are my first impressions. So yeah, Welcome to Dead House. A bit more mature in its themes than what would end up coming out of the Goosebumps series later. And it's not exactly the most fun or wacky storyline, but what it lacked in fun, it made up for in fear. As far as Welcome to the Dead House's influence and legacy on the Goosebumps series as a whole, it never got a sequel. In fact, to my knowledge, there's no reference to Dark Falls or Dead House in any other Goosebumps book that's come out since. Some of the more popular titles in the series can get 2 or even 3 more sequels. We'll get to those later. But yeah, just the 1 for Dead House. If I had to guess, it's probably partly to preserve the ambiguity of the ending, which is fine. Right, on to the next one.
Stay out of the basement!
New shirt. John Wolfe here, the internet's busiest Goosebumps nerd, here with another story review, and this time we're talking about the second book in the series, Stay Out of the Basement. Originally published in July 1992, along the first book, Welcome to Dead House. Hey, we just talked about that one. Anyway, since this was published simultaneously with Dead House, Stay Out of the Basement also has a darker tone to it than the later Goosebumps stories. The difference, though, is that this one is kind of funny sometimes, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, let's get to that cover. So remember earlier when I said it was Tim Jacobus or bust? Well, this is one of the only original Goosebumps covers not illustrated by Jacobus. It was illustrated by a guy named Jim Thyssen, and it's the only Goosebumps cover he illustrated. Interestingly, Tim Jacobus' artwork has been used for later editions of Stay Out of the Basement, like this one, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually prefer the original cover. Just look at that ominous plant hand. And it's completely dark in there, too. I really like this illustration, and I also like the blue-green color scheme. Now that I'm seeing it, actually, I wasn't exactly wild about Dead House and the double purple. The cover color scheme is important. I'm giving this one a solid 4 out of 5 creepy covers. We're off to a good start even before we get into the story, which we'll be doing now. Great segue, John. The story centers around the Brewer family, mainly the 2 kids, Margaret and Casey, and their mysterious dad, Dr. Brewer. There's also a Mrs. Brewer, but she kind of sucks. We'll get into that later. The first thing I noticed about Stay Out of the Basement was on the very first page. It's written in 3rd person. Almost every Goosebumps book is written in 1st person, so this really threw me off at first. After a while, though, I got used to it. Anyway, the first chapter is just Casey and Margaret throwing the frisbee around and talking about their dad's work situation. You see, Dr. Brewer was a scientist at a company called Polytech, but was recently fired. So he's been working from home in the basement, and he has been acting really aloof lately. Margaret even laments that he doesn't even refer to her affectionately anymore.
He's even stopped calling me princess.
I thought you hated that.
The kids decide to go down to the basement to check on him before getting an earful.
Stay out of the basement!
He said it! He said the thing, he said the title! So interestingly, the book and the show handle this pivotal early scene pretty differently. In the book, he screams this phrase at them from the bottom of the stairs. But in the TV show, he screams at them from the top of the stairs. In the show, Dr. Brewer's just hanging out in the house, but in the book, Margaret notes that he's somehow just cut his hand while working down there, and it's bleeding on his lab coat. So anyway, as you may have gathered by now, Dr. Brewer's very private about what happens in that basement, and he won't stop banging on about it.
I just don't want you down in the basement. Did you go into the basement? Don't forget what I said about the basement. You in the basement?
Basement, basement, basement. Just give it a rest already. At the beginning of chapter 2, Mrs. Brewer leaves on a trip to go see her sister, Aunt Eleanor, who's in the hospital.
I'm counting on you two to take good care of your father.
So Dr. Brewer takes Mrs. Brewer to the airport, and the kids are left home alone. It's really hard to say Brewer, by the way. Dr. Brewer. This sounds like I'm saying nothing. Dr. Brewer. Dr. Brewer. In the book, Margaret's friend Diane is over for this part, but there's no such character in the TV episode. That's fine, really, because Diane's pretty much only there to be the rebellious friend who convinces them to go check out the basement. In the show, though, Margaret just hears a weird noise.
What was that?
The kids decide to check out the basement, and as it turns out, the basement is full of plants. It's so humid down there, Casey takes his sweater off. Yeah, Casey's kind of a weirdo. Let's talk about Casey for a second, actually, because one interesting difference between the book and the show is that in the book, Casey is a little brat. You're gross, Margaret. Lucky catch, fatso. Make me a sandwich, Margaret. And naturally, when they're exploring the basement, Casey even treats us to another epic sibling prank. The Goosebumps Act 1 staple. Meanwhile, in the show, Margaret and Casey kind of just work together the whole time. I mentioned earlier that I really liked Amanda and Josh's sibling dynamic, and that I remember later books having much more annoying siblings. But Stay Out of the Basement, for the most part, has an okay sibling dynamic. It's a bit more wholesome in the show than in the book, but Margaret and Casey work together pretty well. I'm getting this pair a solid 3 bickering siblings out of 5. Just kidding, we don't need to rate everything. But just for the record, they would get a 3. Anyway, Dr. Brewer's mysterious basement plants turn out to be pretty noisy.
Listen, it sounds like the plants are breathing.
Margaret even notices she can hear some of them breathing. Uh-oh, looks like Dr. Brewer's home from dropping Mom off at the airport. Why is he honking? Beep, beep. Hey, kids. Hope you're not in the middle of doing anything I wouldn't approve of.
You in the basement?
Casey suddenly realizes that he left his sweater in the basement.
I gotta get it, Dad. I'll know we've been down there.
The book actually does something pretty cool here with its third-person perspective. While the first 5 chapters centered around Margaret's experience, it shifts to Casey's for this chapter, and we get to experience the basement again from his point of view. Unfortunately, Mr. Stein doesn't really do much with it. Casey takes like 4 pages to pick his shirt up. So, Dad catches them, and he's very disappointed that they disobeyed him. From this point on in the story, Margaret starts piecing together some puzzling clues about Dr. Brewer. Everything seems to point at something being kinda off about him. Margaret notices that Dad is always wearing a Los Angeles Dodgers cap. He never takes it off. It's kind of funny because in the show, they can't use the Dodgers logo, so they just have him wearing a cap with an S on it instead. Although they act like it's a team logo anyway.
Hey, Dad, what's with the cap? I thought you hated baseball.
Ah yes, the Los Angeles S's. My favorite team. I used to draw their logo in my notebooks at school growing up. Margaret keeps catching Dad doing weird stuff, one of the funniest being this scene of him scarfing down plant food. In the show, they even take it a step further and show him gulping down like a gallon of water.
Dad.
This is what I meant earlier when I said, stay out of the basement. It's a little funny. Just look at him, he's really going for it. Next, Margaret spies on him and sees not only some green liquid coming out of a cut in his arm, but also, my man's got leaves growing out of his head. The book handles this a little differently than the show. In the book, these are 2 separate incidents, but you get the idea. They're discovering some freaky stuff about him. Finally, and I think this is the funniest one, the kids discover that Dr. Brewer is sleeping on a bed made of dirt and earthworms. I mean, come on. He's just sleeping on a bunch of worms? Why? What would he need the worms for?
Worms are their money. The bones are their dollars.
Margaret confronts Dr. Brewer about his leaf hair, and he reassures her it's just a side effect of his work in the basement. He reveals to the kids that he's working on something
very very unusual. I'm trying to build a plant that is part animal.
Part plant and part animal? Huh?
I can't say anymore.
Then Dr. Brewer makes some gross plant soup for the kids, and he really wants them to eat it.
Pick up your spoons and eat it.
Unfortunately, his interrogation gets interrupted by a home visit from his former boss, a Mr. Martinez, or should I say, Dr. Merrick?
Dr. Merrick.
And the kids shovel the suspicious plant soup into the trash. Yeah, in the book, Dr. Brewer's boss is Mr. Martinez. In the show, it's Dr. Merrick. I don't know why they changed the name. It's like in Welcome to Deadhouse when they changed the character's name from Karen Somerset to Karen Thurston. Except in that scenario, she was kind of a different character. But here, Mr. Martinez and Dr. Merrick are exactly the same character, so I don't know. Dr. Merrick disappears into Dr. Brewer's basement to check out his work because, as it turns out, he didn't want to fire Dr. Brewer.
You know, I've always supported your work. It wasn't my idea to let you go. The board forced me.
But the thing is, he never comes out of the basement.
I didn't see him leave.
Are you interrogating me, Margaret?
There's an extra scene here in the show where Casey gets strangled by a rogue plant vine. And I guess they did that so they'd have a cliffhanger, because this is a two-parter episode, just like Welcome to Deadhouse. Welcome to Deadhouse had a couple of TV exclusive additions too, like the family wreath. But I think the family wreath was way better than the strangling vine. You know, in any case, I did want to note, though, that not every Goosebumps TV episode was a two-parter, so we got lucky for this video that both episodes were two-parters, so we get a lot of extra details. You know, not every story got so lucky, but we'll talk about that another day. I really don't like Monster Blood, if you haven't picked up on that by now. Fed up with their shenanigans, Dr. Brewer installs a lock on the basement door. In the book, he did this way back in chapter 7, but in the show, he does it towards the end.
I'm going out for a little while. I'll be back in a couple of hours.
It's at this point, the books in the show take a pretty major deviation. In the show, Margaret wants to call her mom, but she can't find the phone number.
I think Dad took it. He didn't want us to call Mom.
So she and Casey go to Dr. Brewer's room to snoop around. They end up getting an answering machine message from Dr. Merrick's wife, who says he never came home.
I was wondering if my husband was there. I'm a little worried. He was supposed to be home hours ago.
Suddenly, what's that? Uh-oh, Dad's back. At this point, it's just like, come on, dude. You can't be territorial about every room in the house. Where do you want them to go?
I want you back in your room. Is that clear?
Oh, all right, fair enough. Margaret hides from Dr. Brewer under the bed and sees him drop Dr. Merrick's wallet. In the book, Casey's actually the one who finds the wallet. He finds Mr. Martinez's wallet and a pile of his clothes down on the floor in the basement. In both scenarios, though, the kids reach the same conclusion.
I have to know the truth. And I have a feeling the truth is in the basement.
It's time to get to the bottom of this. Literally! Oh, come on, that one wasn't so bad. The kids head down to the basement. In the show, they come with Weed Killer. You'll find out what that's for later. While exploring the basement, they discover a lot of creepy plant-human hybrids. Although the ones in the show aren't as crazy as the ones in the books. There's this hand plant thing, and then one of the plants has a face. This one actually creeped me out as a kid, to be fair. But the book has one I wish they had made in the show. There's this tomato that has a human nose and mouth, and it's described as uttering mournful sighs. That would have been cool to see. Margaret and Casey hear banging from the supply closet.
Who's there?
And they open it to discover their dad.
Dad? It's Dad! That's not Dad! No, stop! Casey, let go of me! What's wrong with you? It's Dad! It can't be Dad! Dad left, remember?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of distrust between the two kids and what appears to be Dr. Brewer's twin. I mean, where's his trademark Dodgers cap? Dr. Brewer quickly tries to explain the situation.
No, that wasn't me. I've been locked up in that closet for days.
Huh? But how? We saw you.
No, it wasn't me. It's a plant. It's a plant copy of me.
You're saying the father we've been living with is a plant?
That's right. It's all coming together now. That's why he was sleeping on a bed of dirt and worms and eating plant food. Say, what normally eats plant food? Oh, that's right, plants. This is what I mean. Stay in the basement, a little funny. It's a little funny once you start thinking about it, because like, why would Plant Dad need to sleep in dirt? Does he have roots? What is he, again, what are the worms for?
The bones are their money. So are the worms.
Margaret decides to free No Hat Dad, but then Dodgers Cap Dad shows up.
I'm your real father.
The two dads argue back and forth about who's the real one and who's the plant copy. Margaret holds both of them at weed killer point, trying to decide who to spray. That's when No Hat Dad plays his trump card.
Please. Princess.
So Margaret sprays Mr. Dodger's Cap, who turns out to be the true Plant Dad. This scene makes a lot more sense in the book, but, you know, like certain things in Welcome to Dead House, they had to remove some of the more mature themes for the TV show. So let me explain. So in the book, the real Dr. Brewer picks up an axe to defend himself, but in the show, it's just a pry bar. In the same vein, the book doesn't have the kids using weed killer at all. Instead, for the Plant Dad versus Human Dad confrontation, Margaret's wielding the axe Dr. Brewer originally picked up. And most shockingly, the way she figures out which dad is real is she stabs her real dad to see what color blood comes out. Because remember how there was green blood coming out of Plant Dad's cut earlier? But also in the very first chapter, how it details that Human Dad had red blood coming from the same cut. So yeah, the stabbing method works, and the real Dr. Brewer ends up chopping Plant Dad in two with the axe. Yeesh. I remember experiencing this story as a kid, and the concept of an imposter parent was so scary to me. Especially this weird plant guy who, you really couldn't understand their motivations for doing what they did, even after the fact. Like, what was the Plant Dad's strategy exactly? Was he trying to turn the kids into plants? But then what? Well, he has a little plant family. Then he invites neighbors over for more nasty green soup until they have a little plant town. It's not made clear what Plant Dad wanted out of all this. It's even less clear in the show because at the end he tells Margaret to spray her real dad with weed killer, which would do nothing to him since he's not a plant.
Attack him. Now. Before it's too late. Destroy him.
So let's say Margaret did spray her real dad with weed killer. Wouldn't she just spray him right after she figured out nothing happened? It's the kind of thing that works better in the book when it's not weed killer, it's an axe. Also, in the book's last chapter, the rescued Dr. Merrick apparently gives Dr. Brewer his old job back. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone made an evil plant clone of themselves and that evil plant clone kidnapped me and threw me tied up into their basement closet, yeah, I don't think they'd be getting their job back. As for how the plant clone happened in the first place, I'll let Dr. Brewer explain.
Well, it was an accident. I cut my hand on a slide, and some of my blood mixed in with some plant molecules, and I ended up with something that was part plant and part human.
You never told me any of this.
Oh yeah, we need to talk about Mrs. Brewer, the worst character in the story. You never told me about any of this. God, read the room, Mrs. Brewer. Your family just went through something traumatic. You should be relieved, not excited.
You know, when Aunt Eleanor was getting better, she asked me about you two. I said you were both growing like weeds. I never realized how close to the truth I almost was.
Yeah, I'm glad this is all one big joke to you, Mrs. Brewer. Are we sure we don't have a plant mom on our hands? It's even worse in the book. For the plant versus human dad confrontation in the basement, she's there too. And her response to the debacle unfolding before her very eyes is to blame the kids. Kids, what have you done? But of course it doesn't stop her from cutting in with this golden line just a few pages later. We're okay. We're all okay. Yeah, no thanks to you.
Everything's going to be fine.
That acting, right? Look out, Daniel Day-Lewis. Anyway, we're actually not done with Stay Out of the Basement yet. Like most Goosebumps books, this one's got a twist.
Psst, Margaret. Margaret, help me. Please help me. I'm your father. I'm your real father.
Oh, I'm your father.
Ah, yes, the classic, is it really over? Twist ending from Mr. Stein. Although to me, this one is clearly a joke. And now it's time for judgment. Let's microanalyze this children's horror book series made for third graders and see how it stacks up under superior adult scrutiny. So how many funny bones do you think this one's gonna get? Well, we'll start with spine shivers. I'm giving the book 3 out of 5. The psychological thriller aspect is the highlight of the book, but it doesn't really pay off until the confrontational basement scene. And until then, it's just the kids discovering some increasingly ridiculous clues. The plant food, the leaf hair, the dirt bed. Probably the scariest part pre-basement climax is when Plant Dad tries to feed them his mysterious plant soup, because it's really the only time that he tries to do anything sinister. I think the book could have been scarier if Plant Dad was a little less aloof and a little more insidious.
You're not a mad scientist, are you, Dad?
No, I'm an angry scientist.
As for the show, I'll give it a 3 out of 5 too. The actor for Dr. Brewer does a good job at portraying a man on the edge. Or should I say, a plant on the edge. The basement plants could have been a little creepier like in the books, but overall it did a decent job. For funny bones, I'll give both of them a 2 out of 5. It's worth it just for the scene of Plant Dad eagerly devouring plant food. And for closet skeletons, they both get a 3 out of 5. I'm considering the "Dad was a plant all along" climax as the twist ending, and even though it's heavily hinted at throughout the story, stuff like Dad devouring plant food and him serving the kids plant soup can be explained away by him being a mad scientist, not necessarily by him literally being a plant. The flower thing at the end is just a joke, but it's a charming one. I gave a little extra boost to the score for it. Overall grade here, the book and the show both get a solid B from me. They're not the best Goosebumps has to offer, but they're both decent showings. Again, I could change these as we make our way through the series. So, welcome to Dead House and Stay Out of the Basement. 2 solid entries in the Goosebumps series. But our string of good luck ends in the next video. I don't know, maybe it's not as bad as I remember. Let's get back to the subject at hand. When I was reading and watching these first 2 stories, they both strongly reminded me of something. Something dark. Something I hadn't thought about in a long time. Something I had buried back in the recesses of my mind. I'm talking, of course, about Troll 2. Troll 2 is a 1990 horror film that has become infamous as one of the funniest bad movies of all time.
If my father discovers you here, he'd cut off your little nuts and eat them.
And you can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it. They're eating her. And then they're going to eat me. Oh my God!
It released only a couple years before the Dead House and Basement books, and a full 6 to 7 years before the TV episodes, but there's a startling number of similarities. Welcome to Dead House and Troll 2 have very similar sinister townsfolk.
You like Dark Falls? Great place to raise the kids. Kids with a sweet tooth like yours love ice cream.
It's especially apparent in the TV episode where they have the TV exclusive character Agnes Thurston. Check out her exaggerated mannerisms in this scene.
Ever since the chemical factory closed, he practically lives in that workshop of his.
Now check out the primary antagonist of Troll 2, the Goblin Queen.
I thought you might enjoy one of my ancient recipes. It's a traditional dish in these parts.
Oh, but you shouldn't have gone to so much trouble.
No trouble. Really?
I'm seeing double.
Good morning. I am your neighbor.
Oh, it's your friendly next-door neighbor popping in with breakfast.
Thank you.
They even look similar. It's probably coincidence, but it really cracks me up to think that they took inspiration from an obscure B movie. But just look at this. In this scene, the protagonist family is sitting down to a nice homemade meal. A plant soup meal from the looks of it. Yeah, that's right. The goblins in Troll 2 are vegetarians, so they want to turn these guys into plants by making them eat this stuff. Sound familiar?
Pick up your spoons and eat it.
There's a theme in both Dead House and Basement where the monsters disguise themselves as seemingly normal humans. A theme that's shared in Troll 2.
No! Don't eat this stuff! They're monsters! They're all monsters! If you eat this stuff, they'll kill us! They're goblins!
I'm also having fun with the comparisons at this point, though. I think when it comes to Stay Out of the Basement, seriously, if it's inspired by anything, it's inspired by The Fly. It's a very similar story about a scientist that accidentally mixes his DNA with a fly, just like Dr. Brewer mixed his with a plant's. So no, I don't really think Stay Out of the Basement is inspired by Troll 2. It's just funny to think about. It's about as much of a stretch as saying it was inspired by the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes. Look, it's just like when Dr. Brewer tried to feed that plant stuff to his kids. R.L. Stine must have read this one and came up with the story. It's funny coming up with this stuff.
I've come here to say one magic word to you.
Yeah?
Cheeseburger.
Hamburgers for everybody. Let's go.
So, is the hit children's horror book series Goosebumps still scary as an adult? Well, no, but I'm actually surprised at how much I enjoyed rereading these books. It was pretty fun, actually. Hopefully, in the next video, assuming this one doesn't totally bomb, we'll have just as much fun checking out the next stories in the series. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go eat some pea soup and stay indoors. This is what these kinds of channels do, right? Like the nostalgic retro reviewer YouTube channels, they do little skits like this, right? This is fun. What do you think, Mr. Stine?
He's good. He's really good.